Welcome to the Balance Consciousness Podcast, an assortment of enlightening conversations that inspire balance in your wellness of the mind, body, heart, and spirit. I'm your host, Jessica Taylor, and my intention is that with each episode, we open a channel of communication within our energetic systems, increasing our critical thinking, awareness, authenticity, sovereignty, and empowerment. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's dig in. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to the Balance Consciousness Podcast. This is episode 7, and I am ecstatic to have Kole Whitty with me today. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. As you guys understand, we get into a lot of topics, but we're going to be talking about plant medicine today. Just as one of the subjects, we're going to talk about integration more specifically, and I am super stoked to talk to Kole. I have been following her just on Instagram. And I shouldn't say that because her content is hysterical while being informative, and completely relatable as someone who has had several ceremonies under my belt, and the understanding of integration being so important. So I've been following her for a bit, and even as a coach myself, I've thought about your method, Kole, the Condor approach, and I want to really tap into that. So among many other things, Kole is the co-host of the Psychedelic Coach podcast and the Condor Approach Method, which is a psychedelic-informed integration training for the coach who knows that integration is not optional and they refuse to wait and are committed to being a resource of support in their community. So Kole, welcome.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. My favorite conversation. So I'm here for
I
it.
love it. I love it. Well, in the beginning, I always like to start out just asking that really general cliche question of tell us your story, because hearing a bit about your background and whatever you're comfortable sharing really is inspiring to me and the listeners as well, in terms of how we get into a specific aspect of our wellness, so anything that you'd like to share.
hmm we obviously wouldn't have time to get. So, well, I'm going to do the Cliff Notes for context. That's what I'm going to call it for today.
You
Hashtag
got it.
Cliff Notes for context. To, as you said, everyone that ends up in any facet of wellness or mental health, they're either, I feel like, trying to heal themselves or heal someone they love. Like that's usually like the entry point, right? It's either help me or help someone I love. And so it's typically desperation driven, which for me is still inspiration. You are inspired to do different for yourself or for someone you care about. So there's another level of dedication to understanding either human behavior or trauma or health. And for me, mine is kind of all of those personally to, just bring us to today. And like you said earlier, not just to give us, we're going to do like that movie fast forward or rewind very, very quickly. In essence, I grew up just outside of Salt Lake City in a city called South Jordan in Utah. And so culturally there, you've got a lot of people that are LDS, also known as Mormon. You have a very culturally dense, you go to church with the same people, neighborhood of the same people. My neighborhood was predominantly white. I mean, probably like 99.9%. Now, a lot of my friends in school, you know, I had diverse friends, but overall, that culturally, it is very similar. And so in my upbringing, it was baptized at 8. And in the Mormon religion, when you get baptized at 8, now you know right from wrong. And it was only a week after my baptism that there was some sexual experiences that caused me, from the meaning that I created out of it, to go into a deep shame about it. I'm ruined. I'm only 8. My life is over. I knew right from wrong. I'm bad, right? And it had continued for quite a few years. So it was a constant reminder that I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't use my voice. I didn't, all the things an 8-year-old comes up with at those age. Like textbook adverse childhood experience translates into teens, 3 different high schools, from fights, absentee, not going, in school suspension, out of school suspension, until I finally ended up at a high school for at-risk youth that was known as Valley High School. I don't think it's still open anymore, but it was called Valley High School. And that was kind of the last step before the government and everybody else just gives up on you. And I actually thrived at that school. I did really well at that school, and didn't graduate. In the fall of what would have been my senior year of high school, I dropped out of school. I was working full time, and I ended up in a coma from a contaminated batch of GHB, also known as the date rape drug. That's what me and my friends would work with to come down off of stimulants. So MDMA, cocaine, whatever. And I did not use a lot of substances. It was a bad formulation. There was about 9 people that ended up in the hospital that night. And that was a wake up call. You know, it was a wake up call in one way, because that once an addict, always an addict world, the substance world, is the only other alternative. So if you leave the what was then the party rave, though I wasn't into the rave specific, but a lot of house parties and stuff back then, a lot of clubs. The only alternative, if you leave that life, is then the anti drug or the NAAA abstinence world. And seeing that that was my only way out, when I got dropped off at the hospital, I was listed under a Jane Doe because I was dropped off. I was unconscious when they got me there. So no one at the hospital was concerned in what my name was or who dropped me off, right? I wasn't breathing. I was unconscious. They don't care. We just want to get this girl to live. And when it, that in itself is a whole story, but my mother found me there under a Jane Doe. Even how I got in touch with her was a whole thing. And because of the loss of oxygen to my brain from the period of time I wasn't breathing, that year after, I had a pretty tricky time with now what I would know it would be a traumatic brain injury, short-term memory loss, things like that. And so in my effort to turn things around, it wasn't because I suddenly was inspired to do more with my life. It was that I looked at my little sister and I said, I don't want her to be like me. She deserves better. She can't come down this road. And I knew inherently that if I was going to support her, help her, love her, ensure that I could support her, I was going to have to clean some things up. And so it was only about 3 months into my sober journey at that point that there was Miss Utah Teen USA. So it's in the Miss USA line, but it was the Miss Teen. And the platform that year was substance abuse education. So I said, well, if anyone is going to tell the youth of Utah about the dangers of club drugs, I think that should be me. And I was honest about my journey in that. And, still coming out of a very sticky situation in my teens of troublemaking and, run ins with the law and all that stuff. And so at this juncture, this was kind of my second chance, we'll say, to find something with more meaning and keep me on track. Because up until that point, I'd really given up. It just didn't really seem like there was anything that I could do. It felt like any time before that, especially in my teens, anytime I'd get, it's like I made the basketball team, but then grades came out a week later, but I didn't know I was even going to try out for the basketball team until a friend talked me into it because I love to play. Made the team, grades came out. I got like a 1.8. You have to have a 2.0 to play sports. But I didn't know I was going to play sports where I would have gone to more classes. You know what I mean? So it was always like too little, too late of realizations. And so this was the first, I would say, kind of win to help me get some footing, to help me find some purpose and meaning and not shame spiral myself back into oblivion. And that started my path on working with the DARE program and Partnership for a Drug-Free America. And at one point, my story was up on Partnership's website for a few years, and I'd get 200 plus emails a day, sometimes super creepy, and my mom would have to filter them out so that she didn't want me to see them. But I was still, on paper, when I do the news and I do national talk shows and stuff back then, I would get honored for being so brave. But the thing was, I was trying to make up for everything I wasn't. I was trying to make up for everything I felt like I ever did wrong, anyone I ever felt like I harmed. And so it felt more like a penance or a retribution versus any sort of inspiring thing. So no matter how many times I heard it or if an adult acknowledged that or whatever, I didn't feel that. I was like, yeah, thanks. Because all the while, I'm getting hundreds of emails a day from people that are lost, broken, desperate, kids whose parents are addicts, grandparents whose kids are addict and they're taking care of their grandkids. And at this point, I did it full time for quite a few years, and I'm at 20 years old with no therapy background, no coaching background or experience, having these very complex issues of PTSD and trauma that I'm trying to navigate. And that's why today, when someone's like, well, yeah, but Cole, you're not a therapist, I was like, yeah, thank goodness, because I would have had malpractice for like 90 million times back in the early 2000s, right? The truth was my lived experience meant that I had to go the direction of coaching, whether I consciously ever knew that or not. I've been a coach for 20 years. I just didn't know what it was called. And it was a deep desire to help. But the problem was when it's driven by shame, the body starts to degrade.
Mm.
And in about 2000, well, I think it was 2002, 2003, I stopped speaking full time. My story got manipulated a lot. People would say, yeah, I'll send it to you before we print, and they wouldn't, and they'd leave pieces out. And I honestly got tired of people using me for their narratives of substance abuse. Now, I never was anti-drug because honestly, I got so much healing even in the recreational space because I could finally tell people what was really going on inside of me. um, I didn't do a lot to numb or buffer. It was I would do enough to connect, and that it actually saved my life, and ironically, almost took it in other ways, right?
Mm.
And so I was never saying that was bad. I was saying that the environment, the lack of education, and you are taking a risk if you don't understand it. And so when my story would get spun, it was disheartening and it wasn't true. And they would leave parts out or even add parts to where it wasn't my story. And so it felt like I was being used, even though I was getting paid. And I was getting paid a lot of money. By the time I stopped, I made $5,000 an hour to speak at 20 years old, 21 years old. If I would have stayed on that path, I'd be $1 million a year speaker just based off of that. But I wasn't interested in that because it was that at what cost, right? And it was just as gross of prostitution as anything else I could consider that wasn't resonate for me. And that's not even to judge any sort of like sex work or anything, because I'm actually don't have judgment and I think it's a beautiful work too. It's to say that anytime you are selling a piece of yourself for a dollar amount that is based, it's still not authentic to you, it's not real, it's kind of slimy. That's how it felt to me when I
Mm.
describe that. It was that it was cheap and it was dirty. That's how it started to feel. And not that there wasn't ever beauty in it or gratitude, but as I grew and became more influential, I felt like there were higher powers that wanted that influence in the ways that they wanted to utilize it.
Mm.
So I left speaking full time. I was living in New York City. I moved to New York City at 19 and was living New York City life. I grew up in Utah, and I don't think there was ever a moment I didn't want to get out of there. I remember watching movies and everything and being like, I want to live in a big city. I want to get away from here. I wanted diverse lived experiences. I wanted diverse friends. I wanted diverse, like everything, food, like bring it to me, right? And and that's what I got. And so I lived this beautiful single, early 20s lifestyle in New York that was super fun. And then my world kind of crumbled. I moved back to Utah when I was 23 and married a guy that my parents liked. And that was Mormon and LDS. And I think everyone hoped that that would get me into an active position in going to church. And it actually solidified that that was not the life for me, actually. And so we stayed married for, oh, I think we were together 4.5 years or something. But again, I was trying to do what the right thing was because it felt like nothing worked, like the rug would just get pulled out from under me. And when I would hear people say, well, if you would marry a nice guy and settle down, then life would be better if if you were religious, whatever. And I went and did it that way. And newsflash, no, it doesn't work that way either. And so that was what got me back on track with who am I? And that was the first realization I had healing to do, that I couldn't outrun it anymore. And that moment, and this will bring us more to what got me into, because it's like, how do you go from that to psychedelics? That's quite a quite
I
a
love it.
pivot.
I love it so far.
Yeah, and it was so at this point I'm married, living in Utah. I went to Disneyland with my ex-husband and his family. Or I love what one of my friends calls, she calls it her husband. Because it's not really ex, he was, right? Her husband. And I went with his family to Disneyland, and my knees and my body got so swollen and so sore after being there only 2, 3 hours that I couldn't walk anymore. And I sat down on the ground at Disneyland at 26, with 50 pounds more than my body could carry. And I just cried, and for me, that was the moment. It was like, you don't get to take another step the way that you're living. I had traumas that needed resolve and attention. It was showing up in my marriage. We had lots of toxic traits together, just in how we treated each other. Passive aggression turned into aggression, and not saying anything, and things that are also part of like the Utah culture, mixed with my years in New York. So it was just like water and oil, just doesn't really go very good together. Um, and that was the beginning of my healing journey. And if it hadn't been at that rock bottom, and that was a far more rock bottom than my coma ever was, because the coma, I didn't remember anything, and that felt like a fluke accident. That did not feel like I was rock bottom, like I have watched with addicts who are intentionally trying to kill themselves. What I finally realized was that I wasn't trying to kill myself. I just didn't care if I lived. And there is a difference.
Mm,
And when I made the decision that I would bring more care to living, is only the time that I recognized that I was on an unconscious level trying to kill myself from a cellular level. And that's a whole other conversation too. Journeys, mushrooms, that's a whole journey.
mhm,
But it was in that moment that a friend, I lost 30 pounds. I started working out. I was feeling great. And a friend told me, hey, so you're coming out to LA. And when you're the weekend you're supposed to come, we've got this ceremony thing. And it's this shaman, and he has these plants. So I'm imagining, in my very Mormon upbringing, cultural, no concept of shaman, we're talking now, this was 2008. I don't even know what shaman really means, but I'm envisioning like, some indigenous man in all white swinging plants, almost like frankincense in like the Vatican. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea. But then he told me, yeah, psychedelics. And then he sends me an article on ayahuasca. First of all, if someone has an addict or substance background, please don't send them information on ayahuasca. Like, that's the most terrifying, like, worst introduction with if someone's afraid of losing control with substances. Um, but I saw the signs and I felt in my body, and I trusted this man. I mean, we've been friends forever. Um, and so I went, and that was the first night after, since I'd been in the coma and all that stuff, that at that point I was 8 years from the coma, I think, give or take 8, 10. I was 17, and this was 26, 27, somewhere in that pocket.
mhm.
Now that I'm in my 40s, it's like it's getting a little bit foggier timelines. And so that night was the night that I got to put down this badge I'd been wearing on my chest of addict, because I'd been carrying that.
Mm,
And that had me afraid of always like falling off or getting sucked back in or pulled back in, even if I didn't consciously believe that. Unconsciously, when you get the programming and hear it enough times that all the speaking engagements are on Montel Williams or from this mother or this child or this parent or this whoever, you can't help but carry some part of that.
mm,
And that night I got to take that off. And it was like a weighted vest. And that was the beginning of my work in the psychedelic field, in the shamanic work, in the what is it to connect with these master teachers, whether in plant, animal, or fungi form, or molecule, chemical. What is it to work with these intentionally as teachers. And that was really the night that it started, is when I realized, oh, wow, okay, so I'm not an addict and I never was. I just didn't have tools.
Mm,
And now that I have tools, I don't need to use anything. I can be with my feelings. I don't need to crutch. And I also don't judge the crutches that had been or would ever be. I actually found deep gratitude for the crutches I had throughout my life, whether they were people or food or substances.
mm,
And that was truly the beginning of, I mean, I guess I wouldn't have been surprised if you told me what I do now, but it would have felt, no, I think I would have been stoked at that point. But if you would have told me before that first journey, it would have been like, no, there's no way. I've come too far down this DARE program and partnership situation for that.
mm. For a second, I forgot that I was hosting a podcast. I was just sitting and listening to your story. I was like, oh, I have to talk now. Um, Thank you so much for sharing in such an authentic and vulnerable way. And I know that we both share, at least just from, when I watch your content and looked at your website and stuff, that we both share that embracing our imperfection is such a powerful tool that not only helps us to heal, but helps us to be of service to others. And so thank you. I just wanted to say, like, energetically, I really felt just the authenticity of your journey, and that you're like, this is what it was and I'm not holding back, and it's such a beautiful journey. Thank you so much for sharing. As a fellow ex New York City resident, I spent my 20s there as well. I completely understand that drive of going from one environment to, this is all I want. And I remember, for me, it was because I was a dancer. I was a concert dancer. And so you go to New York, and I remember saying things like, "Oh yeah, I'm like so excited about getting that little shoebox, like shitty hole in the wall apartment, and oh, it's going to be great." And everyone's like, "What the hell is
Oh, I was
what
all
is
for it.
wrong with you?" Right? Now, granted, like, there were some things where I was like, yeah, I could have gone in obviously with a lot more tools. I was 22 when I moved there, right? But the experience, and I was right there with you, of like, I want diversity around me. I want to meet like as many different kinds of people as possible and learn, and just soak it all up. So I very much resonated with that. And there was something that you said, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to repeat it well, but it really hit me in my body, and I wanted to repeat it because it was so powerful. You said, when coaches are coaching from a place of shame, clearly it's not going to work. It's something that comes from a very dysregulated place. And I found that to just be, I mean, obviously it's true, but something that might ultimately segue us into, talking about mental health and the mental health crisis right now, because there are so many coaches out there. Everyone and their mom is a coach. And what's beautiful about it is that people are wanting to be of service, some with different intentions than others. But I know personally from my experience that through my coaching, I also heal because of each client's experience and my interaction with them energetically, spiritually, emotionally. Um, so it's almost like a community builder in a way. And I don't know how you feel about this, because you work with coaches, uh, specifically, especially through the integration and the Condor approach. How many coaches would you say are working from a place of shame right now?
Well, honestly, most people are working from shame.
Yeah.
So, shame in my context is something is bad, wrong, broken, too much, or not enough.
Yeah.
Guilt is when I've done something wrong. Shame is when I feel like there's something wrong with me intrinsically. on a soul level.
Mhm.
Like on a karmic level, I don't deserve for all, for some reason.
Yeah.
And you can take that to religious context, familial context. I'm grateful to see so many coaches. I think that a lot of coaches are getting a bad rap in the industry is anyone who didn't ever see the toxicity that's always been here isn't looking, right? But the interesting thing is anytime there is a torch and pitchfork approach where it's like,
Mhm.
you know, oh, this coach is using shame. Yeah, I mean, and so did your parents, and so does your boss. And so, we're surrounded by it.
Mhm.
And when I really tuned in to what is my intention, what am I here? So, intention for me is what do I want to know? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Or what do I want to understand? And with the condor approach method, that all came from my ceremonies. It's the condor because that is the spiritual significance of dead and dying systems evolving. The condor
Mhm.
is what helps the dead and dying to transmute and transform into its environment, not get rid of it,
Mhm.
to actually help it evolve. And so that whole evolution includes the coaching industry.
Mhm.
I don't go eat at one restaurant and get food poisoning and say restaurants are dangerous. They could get you sick, right? I just
Mhm.
won't go back to that restaurant and I'll know what questions to ask. I'll see do they have a B rating, or
Right.
they've never been rated or they've been shut down by the health department. And by when I really went to the intention, it was like, how do I, one, inform the public of what questions to ask and things to consider? And then two, how do I teach them to trust themselves so that they understand what is my truth in my instincts and what is my truth in my intuition? My instincts from my model is things that have happened to me, I've heard of, or I've seen, and my body's efforts to keep me alive are free from harm. My intuition is much more subtle, much more delicate and quiet. And so there's times I might say, well, no, it's no, but it's my instinct saying no, but it can say no to love. It
Mhm.
can say no to beautiful opportunities because it's on the other side of that threshold of fear, where
Mhm.
my intuition might be like, no, but it's quiet and it's subtle. And
Mhm.
so when I really stripped everything away and said, what do I know is true for me to do? What is this purpose I have feel called to that is quite clear for me? It was, how do I help people understand how to trust themselves so that no matter where they go, they know how to ask questions, self advocate, take radical self responsibility. Because if they go into a psychedelic experience giving their power away to the shaman or the substance, that's when it gets dangerous. If I go in to be interdependent versus codependent, that's why for me, I say I work with plants, fungi, and well, mostly plants and fungi for me, and cacti, succulents.
Mhm.
If I go in as a student, I get a teacher. If I go in as a patient, I get a doctor. And so, even for me to say, now in a South American context, I might say medicina, because that is the context of the lineage I'm working with. But in the States, for me, they're not medicine. Just like for me, they're like water, they're life giving, not fixing, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Water is critical, but I don't say, oh, hold on, let me have a sip of my medicine when I grab my water bottle. But down
Mhm.
in the jungle, they do because everything is medicine,
Mhm.
right? Not just because it's psychoactive or psychedelic. And
Mhm.
so as I went through my teachings and finding coaches and all of that, I said, okay, well, then what I deeply desire is to help people what questions to consider and how to get clear within themselves and that then it doesn't matter where they go, whether it's a coach, a boss, a business, a spouse, children, making life decisions would be the greatest gift that I would hope for each person, regardless of coaching.
Yeah. I love this because, in my coaching work, whether I steer it this way or not, it always comes down to self-love, and specifically to what I call radical self-love, which is you know, our feeling that we're basically rebelling against culture because, right, we, especially in the States, haven't been taught to self-love or to even understand what that means. And so shame obviously comes up a lot. And there's a exercise that I really like to do with clients that I also do on myself every now and then. And I call it the character asset and deficit exercise. And we basically just make a list, 10 things that we love about ourselves. And it could just be adjectives, and then 10 things that we just hate about ourselves. What we ultimately find is that normally an asset and a deficit ends up being connected. It's just where the scale has tipped, where the teeter totter has gone, right? So, she's obsessive, right? She actually has attention to detail, and she's really vigilant and reliable and a hard worker. But when we're lacking in self-love or when we aren't aware, it's going to tip this way, right? She's a perfectionist, right? Oh, well, actually, when she's not under that label, she's the best employee you're ever going to have, you know? But what I always find is that if shame comes up, it is the only deficit that does not have an asset to it. So instead of finding the asset, we have to find the antidote, and the antidote is self-love. I always say that gratitude is the antidote to unhappiness. Self-love is the antidote to shame. But again, what is self-love? Is it just through action behaviors? Like you were saying about your story, doing the right thing. I'm doing the right self-love thing, right? Do you feel it in your body? Does it feel right to you? The fact that you're seeking external validation is kind of showing me something, right? So that hit me hard. And thank you for going into a little bit of not quite into a shame spiral, but a shame spiral conversation with me. Cause that's beautiful. And, it is it's just such a powerful emotion, and why, people like Brene Brown and people who like study it like to the core have been so instrumental to coaches and their work. Now, I don't believe that anyone should ever have arrived somewhere in order to be a coach, because I believe we never arrive. But I do believe that our radical self-love work is supposed to be lifelong. And even if we feel like we have a really, really good relationship with ourselves, we are going to ebb and flow. We are going to what I call ride the Buddha wave and have those dips, those peaks and valleys. And so it's that consistency in those tools. It's the same as when I talk to my Pilates clients, even just a client this morning, gosh, I don't know why it's so hard for me to do those homework exercises you give me every day. It's only supposed to be 3 minutes. I'm like, I know, right? It's amazing. Like just these little baby steps that we could take, but because they seem so little, we may not take them at all. And right there is us having to train ourselves. I love myself enough to do that little 3-minute thing that might seem trivial at the time, but it helps us also to, and I know we're going to talk about this a lot as well, tap into the communication of our systems. And that's what I love to get geeky about. Am I talking to my body? Am I talking to my mind, to my heart, and to my spirit? Can I actually see them as separate things for a second? Obviously, they're interconnected. But can I wake up and say, what does that one need? What does that one need? Oh, that one's kind of cool. Cool. We're feeling cool there. That one needs a lot of help. Let's give that one some love, and we're just being bombarded by so many tools on social media that all it does is dysregulate us even more, because I think I keep coming back to the phrase you said, Kole, of I wanted to do the right thing. And I think that that's something that I at least have viewed, is that, people want so badly to heal, but they feel that they need to do it the right way rather than just coming home and listening, really listening. So when you're speaking about coaches, I mean, everyone's an individual, right? Like everyone has their own unique, amazing approach and voice and story and abilities and skill sets that will bring in the right clients, the right people who they get to serve. So I love this, and I just love continuing to hear about your program. I gotta say already, I mean, like what, we're like a little over halfway through. I'm totally in. I totally want to try this. Um,
Well, you said a couple things there that I'd love to touch on
yeah.
around some of the parts of the body, right? Because this is where I think the languaging can get really sneaky in the
Mhm.
psychedelic conscious exploration space. There's a few things I watch myself get hung up on and other people too. All right, so I learned to at least accept there's parts and shadow parts of myself that I was rejecting. So now I accept, now I'm going to go all in and I'm going to go hard and I'm going to see all of it. But we can become attached to needing to dig it all up in order to either deserve or to have done the work to deserve the play, right? This
Mm,
earning thing. So it still can become another way to be hard on yourself versus freedom from it. And the moment that changed for me, I was in a ceremony and the message I got was, if you keep digging in the dirt, you'll find it. If you want to create, you have to look to the stars. And
mm,
what that represented to me was looking at your hands, and the filth on the hands is what I saw from all the digging, but there was no creation. And when I started to see that I wasn't the architect of my life still, I was digging this hole, but I didn't know what I was going to put in the hole. So then it's just a big hole that's empty. And so that started to shift me from the maturation I feel that happens is at first it's being able to accept myself. I don't even have to love it yet. I can merely accept that it is or accept that it isn't. And from there, I can start to build tolerance. Once I can, I guess I start to build the tolerance first to even tolerate the uncomfortable emotions, say in a ceremony. Then I can start to accept them. And then if I have tolerance and acceptance, then I can start getting towards self love. Because at first, it's like, I was just trying to get life to suck less. So the idea of self love was this foreign concept that was
mhm,
just like, look, I respect me. That feels pretty good. I respect that I'm dedicated and a hard worker and, great in a traumatic circumstance. I'll help and all that. And then I became attached to the digging in the work because it was like,
mm,
oh man, this is cathartic and it feels good to fix this, solve this. But on one hand, it was keeping me from creating, which was also safe because then I don't have to actually see what I'm capable of. Yeah, let me just finish this shadow work. I'm only at age 12. I still got like 20 more years in there. Then I'll emerge from the depths of shadow work. And what I found was that part of my shadow work was not giving myself permission to play and to create. And I
mm,
found that in my body. And so when I'm getting too focused on getting the work done, I notice more back pain because I'm
mm,
carrying a heavier load and I'm carrying a lot on my back or on my shoulders. And so if I'm getting shoulder pain, tightness, contraction, it's what you said. I'm going to talk to my shoulder, not because it's separate of me, but because it's a part of me. I'm in a marriage. I still do have to talk to my partner if I want us to be cohesive. We have a third entity called the marriage that is connected, but it's still not all one intelligence. So I love what you said. And when it comes to talking to my body, I'm talking to the cells, the blood cells, the microbiome, the skin, the follicles of hair, because all of that for me is holding intelligence from the food I've eaten, the genes of my ancestors, the water that I drink, the air around me, and that if I am willing to listen, I have ancient technology speaking through my body at all times.
mm,
It's, am I slowing down enough to create space for so that I can hear it? And
mm,
when we're busy, when we're in pain, when we're in shame, for me, shame serves one thing, and that's convenience.
mm,
It is convenient for systems for shame to be a powerful device. Whether it's religion or family, it gets someone to self police, stay small, and gives us the opportunity to control. So it has one purpose, that's control. And when I look at oppression, its overarching is convenience also. Shame can be a self repression or oppression, or we put that on other people, but it is oppressive and it causes us to contract in, destroy, ruin, play small, break down for the convenience or of someone or something else. That's why it gets programmed in. To be a good person helps to create a cohesive culture. Doesn't mean that it's harmonious, but it works together for the purpose of the system. And when I started to see that, sometimes that's all I needed to let myself off the hook of a shame spiral. It was like, aha, you're trying to control me, right? Like whatever system
Mhm.
or conditioning. I call them constructs. But those constructs can work like entities
Mm.
to really, they work through the body and the system. That's what they're designed to do.
Mhm. And I love just like in that last little couple sentences, you have those moments of aha and you go, ha ha ha, there you are. I
Tricky.
love, yeah, just like, oh, you little devil. And that is a place that I always love to be in. And I love it when, my clients or loved ones or whatever have those moments as well. It means that you've done enough healing to go, oh, there it is again. And I'm going to laugh about it. That's cool. Like, I'm not going to shame myself in the process. It is a part of me. It's just not something that I'm going to let, steer the car. Just like, I use fear as a big part of that. Like, okay, we need fear to not, walk into oncoming traffic or walk off a cliff, but do we want it to drive our entire life? No. Um, I absolutely love this. Let's talk a little about plant medicine. And
Mhm.
Um, I have a few questions, even though your specialty is about integration, and that is the thing that I'm like, oh yes, I'm all about it. I figured I'd tell you like a little bit of kind of my story, um, being in ceremony and how when I've spoken to different people, and I know I've seen some content of yours about this as well. There's some people who it must be done this way. It must be X, Y, Z. And then there's some who are like so opposite end of the spectrum that they're, the overnight shaman and they're, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, what's your background? And it's really actually very interesting that to kind of like look for that balance of like respecting obviously where the plant has come from, the spirituality behind it, things like that, but also having, you know an understanding that, yeah, if I've had 1, 2, 3 ceremonies, that might be enough for me, but I could still really be um, interested in helping people to integrate or, whatever. So I bring all that up to say, I've had experience both with psilocybin and ayahuasca, and all beautiful and also ugly, and I'll say specifically with my ayahuasca experience, I had 3 ceremonies within the course of a week. And it was incredibly healing. And it was also something where if I didn't listen to, here comes the intuition, not my instinct, but if I didn't listen to my intuition as I was even planning this trip to go, I don't think that I should come home right away after this. I think I might need another week, you know, letting go of all that fear of like, oh God, I got to make money. Oh, I never take that much time off. There was something in my body that was like, it is not going to be okay if you try to, come
Rush.
back. Yeah. And while the facilitators I worked with were absolutely amazing and they gave resources for integration, they themselves were not integration coaches. And this is something that I find to be really interesting is that, it seems like there's a lot of facilitators out there now. And I'm wondering, what the dialogue is among those facilitators about how important integration is. So
Hmm.
so I'm glad I listened to that intuition because holy shit, Kole, that second week was like insane. I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, everything is gorgeous. And also, WTF, like, what is going on? And like that second week makes me relate to so many of your reels that you put on Instagram.
Oh
I just
yeah.
like crack up. And, but what was beautiful about it, without working with an integration coach or anything, but having the tools that I had at that time, and I had already done a lot of healing work, fortunately, was that it forced me to listen to my systems because I couldn't go at the pace that I was going before. So I had to go, whoa, I'm feeling an intense emotion coming up, and I have no idea why I'm about to bawl right now, but I'm going to let it happen because everything is beautiful. And I know we're just in a simulation right now of my own creation. And, so that whole week was like, oh, I'm crying. Oh, now I'm like really sweaty. Oh, now I'm kind of like breathing really deeply. That feels nice. Ooh, I had a weird pain come out of my stomach. That was interesting. And my theme became let it flow. Let it flow. Anytime that something uncomfortable came up, I knew that if I hit it with resistance, it was going to be terrible. And so I just had this week of experimentation just within my body because I'm so visceral and
Hmm.
really sensitive in my energetics. And I would just go, oh, wow, when I don't resist, it's kind of intense, but it's like, shoom, shoots out of me fast. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And this was out without any sort of like guidance or anything. And I can only imagine if I would have had an integration coach, what my experience would have been like. So that's just like a little bit about my experience. My psilocybin experiences have been beautiful. They weren't under so much like a ceremony environment, but they were very intentional for me. I've always taken this stuff very seriously, and for me it has always been about integrate, but I think it's also been, I just need to let my body integrate, and then maybe mental, emotional, spiritual answers will come. But my body is the sensitive thing where I'm like, whoa, give it time. So
Hmm.
that I have other questions, but do you have anything you want to
I mean, a
say
lot,
to
right?
that?
So, think about it like, so have you ever seen someone that's kind of like hunched over? Like they've got a scoliosis.
Yeah,
Their
all my
body,
Pilates clientele.
fair, their body has healed into that position.
Yeah.
That's actually a healed position.
Hmm.
And so someone can go to a psychedelic experience, and if they don't have any tools going into it, they can heal in a contorted, non functional way. It is the disintegration. So it's almost like a surgery, right? You go in for a surgery, then afterwards you need physical therapy, or you need it reset, or
Right.
you need a cast on a bone, but then the cast has to come off in order so it doesn't or like break down or atrophy the muscle.
Yeah.
For me, going into these experiences, shaman are not coaches. That's not integration is not a thing down in the jungle because they live integrated. They live in community, they raise each other's kids. It's an integrated cultural environment. In the States, we don't operate that way. We operate very solely, alonely, together.
Mhm.
Not the same thing. So when
Yeah.
you take someone into a context like an ayahuasca ceremony, they get disintegrated like a sandcastle. You just kick their sandcastle over. Many are returning home in that disintegrated state. You can have a big realization in your heart or your mind. Your body takes time, it's process oriented. You didn't grow to that height and that weight and where you are overnight. So you can change rapidly in your heart and your mind and your spirit. That does not mean your body can calibrate so quickly.
Hmm.
So even if there was a miraculous healing that can take place in a ceremony, and it can, the body, from my experience, needs time to recalibrate. So that extra week, the random crying, for me, that's the recalibration of the systems. Where are we now? We have to orient to this new internal environment. And if the body is like wet cement and you go throw it back in the old environment, the possibility or potential that they're going to heal optimally is not very high.
Hmm.
So this is where I really like to break down like the different roles in a psychedelic space. This is how we explain it, right? So we have a trip sitter. A trip sitter just sits with you, literally just sits there. That's why they are a trip sitter. The person goes on the journey within themselves. The trip sitter doesn't usually give the substance or have anything to do with it. So that would be like a friend sitting for a friend. They just want to make sure that you're physically safe. But the person usually has some level of confidence. I got this. I want the added layer in case I need support. And then from there, we have an integration coach. Integration coaches work before and after. So I'm going to help you prepare what questions to ask. That's a coach. Coaches are like future vision, therapists are more past. And it doesn't mean that both can't exist together, but as far as like kind of super generalizing. And then in a psychedelic space, we have space holders. Those might be the people that you see that are changing buckets, getting tissues, but they're not doing shamanic work necessarily, energy work, entity work. They might clear with smokes or whatever, but they are in charge of the space and holding it. So holding space is an interesting thing to explain when you haven't experienced it. So if someone hasn't experienced it, I want you to imagine holding space is when someone you love is having a charged conversation with you and you're literally just holding your tongue and holding the space so they can emote. You are holding your tongue, holding the space so they can emote. You're creating a safe space or a literal place for them to emerge from and be seen, witnessed, whatever. So that's a space holder. And then we call them like shaman or Sherpa. They imbibe with you and go into the ceremony with you. So, like an ayahuasquero, common in ayahuasca ceremonies, they take with you. So, they're more guiding you inside of the journey. So, for us, that's what we would call a Sherpa, like going up to Mount Everest, right? You have a Sherpa that takes you. So, that's how we delineate there. And then we have a facilitator. Someone could be a facilitator that gives you the substance, holds the space, is there with you and for you, but they're not doing spiritual work. So they might open with some sound healing, they might do some breath work, but they're really facilitating the space, not the spirit. So that's kind of like the different ways that I like to look at it. And so if someone knows just what questions to ask, if they could clear up their expectations, that's going to help on the other side. So if you're going down to Peru and you're going to work with a ayahuasquero down there, because shaman's not a word that is their word. Let's say you're working with a curandera, um, then they're not going to do integration because that's not a thing. Which means if you're returning home, you want a plan. You want some sort of check in, whether it's everyone in your retreat, and you want to have an idea of what are signs you might not be integrating well.
Mm.
Because what I see is most people never go back and tell the original facilitator if they aren't okay. They might the first week, but if you're going to retreat centers that are doing one a week or every weekend, they're getting a new group, they don't have time for you. And it's not that they don't want to, it's not possible.
Mhm.
And that's why many of them don't integrate, is
Mhm.
because they can't. And usually, if someone's more of that, you know, sitter, Sherpa, shaman person, not coaches, not the same thing. They
Mhm.
could also be a coach. They're not the same thing. And part of what we've been empowering with more retreat centers and different shaman and spiritual workers and light workers is we're like, you don't have to be the one to coach. You need a plan for the people that sit with you. Because from a responsibility place, from an integrity, from a safety, from a reciprocity, they're giving to you. You don't just give to them that night, crack them open, and send them home. There needs to be a plan in place. So we've even been helping retreat centers or facilitators team up with the coach. So good, stay in your power and your gifts, please. Recognize though, not doing it or saying I don't want to is not going to be a good enough excuse anymore. Or not excuse or not, it's just not going to work anymore. Because with what you described, there's so many people starting to serve medicine or serve psychedelics that that isn't going to be good enough anymore because too many people are going into this work now without the prep work like you had that don't leave the week after open because they don't know and they don't know how to hear themselves. And
Yeah.
so for me, this is the part of when we tell people, are you hearing the call? It's the call to step into a greater awareness of nervous system regulation, of what your gifts are. And then where are the gaps in your gifts that in order to truly care for the people you serve, they are fulfilled. Like I helped one retreat center. I said, just add an extra $100 to every ticket. I'll team you up with one of our Condor coaches because they don't want to serve medicine. legality, they have shared custody, there's too much at risk where they live, it's not legal. But they would love to practice their coaching and space holding and helping people within psychedelics. That is them working in that right now.
Mm.
And for them, we teach them how to use what we call the Condor Approach workbook. So it teaches people how to coach themselves. And then they get on a call with a person so that it's, where do you feel stuck? What do you need as far as support? But that's only 2 calls per month. So the
Mm.
coach can now say make $1,000 a month for 2 hours worth of calls. But it's available to the people, and there's a clear flow from the intake process to the integration process. And a lot of facilitators and shaman are not doing intake either. And
Yeah.
harm is increasing, and fatalities are increasing in ayahuasca circles.
Mhm.
Why? Because the intake and the integration is not cohesive. And
Yeah.
so I don't have any problem if someone has one experience and feels like they're ready to guide people. What I'll tell you is everyone eats a piece of humble pie when you think you know what you're doing.
Mhm.
There's a lot that you don't know, and you don't know that you don't know it until you get served a piece of it.
Mm.
And so my, I guess my cautionary tale, or my invitation as someone that has learned some things the hard way, or the so that I could illuminate it for you way, there's a lot that you can know so that you're very clear in what you can hold space for and who you could hold space for starting right now. And then what other tools or techniques you'd need to add to your toolbox to do the work you really feel destined to do.
Mm.
Now, if it's holding space with psilocybin or kanna is totally legal. There's other cacao, there's entry places to start to study shamanic work. And if you haven't done that work on yourself, you will inevitably get someone that pushes on all of your woundings and traumas and tragedies and whatever. Um, it's a way to learn. You don't have to learn that way. And so it's really for people that care, for the people that say, I don't know, I want to. I'm hearing the call, I want to answer it with intentionality. That's why they come to the Condor approach. It's the
Mm.
ones that are lifetime students. It's the ones that are, I don't need evidence of a certification. I know that I want to understand, even if someone is saying yes, how do I ride their nervous system to ask more questions because I'm not getting a congruent message from their body, and I want to check in, not
Mhm.
injecting or projecting what you think is best for them as a coach or as a shaman or whatever, but recognizing how their ideas and constructs are operating through the body. We call it body logic. So people can't see it on if you're listening, but I have this big puzzle ball in my hand, and this is how we see a nervous system. Think of it like a molecule looking thing, that when you're really open and excited and you're in a psychedelic space connected to spirit, God's source, you're expansive and open to take all this information in. But when you leave to go back out into the world, that has to contract down, just like the breath, just like the heartbeat. It contracts down, but for me, that's actually the expansion inward. We expanded outward. In order for me to send all that information through my body, I contract inward, just like when your heart pumps. All that consciousness, all that knowing is getting pumped through the body, and it's calling you inward. Just by
Mm.
knowing little basic things like that, after a ceremony, if you cry or a sudden pain, you don't panic or meaning. You go, oh, I'm calibrating, if that's the word for you. Or, oh, this is a sign for me to create space or to go within or whatever. And on the flip side of that, sign someone's not integrating well, very
Mhm.
dysregulated. Ayahuasca wouldn't be a good fit for them. Adrenal fatigue, blown out system, going and doing something like ayahuasca, I don't typically recommend. And I say typically, there's always exceptions. But there are always signs that the body is not being considered and you
Mm.
are not bringing consent to the body. And so if you force it into another cup, if you force it into Cambo and burning the skin, you are actually acting upon violence. It is a violent act against your system.
Mm.
And then it will speak loudly in response because you aren't listening, and you can't medicine your way out of trauma.
Mhm.
You can
Mhm.
open yourself to see yourself, but it's not like getting an exorcism of the trauma.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I see people approach it that the harder, faster, more now, if I go stay in the jungle for 30 days, I'll purge it all out, I'll poop it all out, I'll sweat it all out, and then I'll be free. Doesn't work like that.
I am just so grateful that you were just on my wavelength. You literally started answering all the next questions that I was going to ask, especially speaking to the difference in culture and why, obviously, Americans need integration so much more. Because yes, that's why I took a second week in Costa Rica, because it was the slowest place ever and it was amazing. And I just could be in touch with nature. But I believe that, among many of the other things, the best thing about that healing for me was that it helped me to tap back into my own intuition and understand that voice. Um, so yeah, and then speaking to the fixing a trauma with an exorcism, thank you for saying those exact words. um because I obviously, we have all heard many, many amazing stories of people, healing their addictions and all sorts of things. um but the only part of the story that we hear is I took some medicine and it was healing, and like rarely do people talk about the before and the after. um just because I want to be respectful of your time, I'm going to kind of rapid fire just to follow up on that. So integration coaches specifically, do you think that they need to be going on intense dietas or experience something like that, or at the very least, um, experience plant medicine regularly in order to be an integration coach?
I feel like some people are naturally coaches and naturally empathic in different ways. For me to feel in integrity, to hold space for someone, I'll never be able to understand what they've been through, especially if they don't look like me, grew up where I grew up, whatever. I can't understand, right? So the idea that I could take medicine to understand someone that's been in medicine when the experiences are so different doesn't make sense to me either. And it's more about, have you gone to the depths of yourself of understanding what it's like to be totally out of control, to not know what to do or who you are anymore.
Mm,
And there is a palatable difference when someone has been with these master teachers. I can
mm,
feel it. I can be walking down the street and stop and talk to someone, and we're there within 3 questions,
mm,
because there's a frequency, like a frequency vibrational tone to it,
mhm,
and it's more of a connection point. So what I would say is, I don't think that it's a prerequisite or a requirement, especially if someone legally, there's some tricky spots. But I also don't think that just because someone's done a bunch, that makes them a great coach, like they understand it.
mhm,
So it's an individual, unique space. If someone said, I refuse to, then that is typically for me more the resistance is my question.
mhm,
But I've had people go, I did, and the message was, this is not my work.
mhm,
I get that. So it's really meeting people where they are. I go with curiosity. Curiosity, plus courage is what equals expansion. And
mm,
so by me getting more inquisitive and not accusatory or blame, then I go, okay, so it's interesting. You want to be, because I'll have people come to our program that have never done anything, right? And never even had alcohol, nothing. And I'll be like, so why are you here? The
wow,
truth is on a deeper level, they are curious for themselves. They don't feel safe enough to explore it. So this is the excuse. But it's just that no one's stopped long enough to ask more questions. And I'm
mm,
curious. So it's more empowering an individual person. If so, you're going to sit with someone and they say, well, no, I haven't. Get curious. That doesn't mean
mm,
they're not qualified. Having a safe space allows the individual to go into themselves and work with the master teacher in plant, animal, or fungi form. So if they feel safe, what difference does the coach or facilitator make, right? If the
mm,
environment is safe. Some people never need a facilitator because they've got resources, they've got self confidence, they've got that self love. Got it. I personally really don't need a facilitator if I'm under 10 grams of mushrooms and a cup of ayahuasca. I got it. Now go higher dose, different realms, another conversation, or entity work, again, another conversation. And so, but I've done so much work on myself and I have such a certainty of who I am that even in the roughest terrain, I still got me. That trauma response. Thank you, me, did the work. Yay, me.
mhm.
that's not the case for everyone, right? And so it's more really, again, going back to the individual person, who do you want guiding you? Would you feel safer if they have a level of empathy? If they have a level of what it's like to connect to that God source energy that you can't articulate, and when you try to explain it to someone and they look at you like you're crazy, so you don't totally feel accepted, you start to filter. And so it's, do you feel safe, connected, and fulfilled with the person that's going to hold the space? If you want to be a coach, why? Why would you want to hold space for other people and unwilling to experience it for yourself? And maybe you don't do it now and it's on the plan in a year from now.
Mhm.
But usually, if there's resistance, it's because there's something there, or they're on a pedestal of trying to save someone. But if
Mm,
you come into this work trying to be the savior and they don't get the result that they want, you become the villain
yeah.
by proxy.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, all of that to say there's not a one size fits all to this. That's why I love coaching.
Hmm.
When we get to find someone that resonates for us, none of that actually makes any difference. Not accreditation, not college, not my good enough diploma known as a GED. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's when you know that you feel safe with someone,
Mhm.
then regardless of whether they sat or not, as a coach or as a facilitator becomes kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. And it brings me again back to intuition, because for me, it's just about, do I feel the call? And so I think and again, I don't want to keep getting too deep into the conversation for sake of time, but I feel like there's another side of it of like, is it that there's resistance, or is it that we might literally still be integrating an experience from a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
and so it could be happening again. It's like I mean, I know still deeply feel connected to Aya right now. And it's been 9 months maybe. And I love that. And there's no fear behind it. So I love hearing uh your thoughts on it, because it is based on the individual and the level of empathy is, especially, I mean, that's what I want, especially when it's coming to something that is an incredibly vulnerable place and can be really freaking scary. And so many people go into it without the proper prep. So people experience trauma just within, that ceremony itself that they didn't realize they even had. So the empathy
Mm-hmm.
level is crucial. Um,
There's one thing
yeah.
I'm going to chime in there real quickly. It's like some people will go to a relationship coach that is not in a relationship and they're good with that kind of coach. I want to go to the coach who's been married for 20 years, that had to figure it out, maybe got divorced, or they almost split up and really had to overcome things long term and worked together. Why? Because
Mm,
that's the kind of coaching support I would want, right? Or if I was seeking that.
yeah.
So some people can have a coach where they are conceptualizing. I want one that has been through the fire and walked the path in some way and has the result that I want. That's my kind of teacher. So that's also how I delineate is,
Yeah.
if you haven't had the results that I want, I'm probably not going to take your advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every single mentor that I've had has been through hell and back and is incredibly humble and, is still a student. And that's what I love. That's what I love. The before I just, plug your book and your website and things like that, I just wanted to say, I know we're not going to be able to dig into this probably at all, but I did send you a prompt question, and it was along the lines of like, what do you feel that humanity needs right now the most in terms of their wellness? And I wrote it down again to retain it. And what was really cool was that it ended up kind of separating into three parts. And I was like, wow, you have to do this, to do this, to do this. So you said for people to learn how to hold space for themselves. That's one. You said all this in one sentence. And learn to navigate their felt senses and emotions, totally different thing, by learning the language that their body speaks, totally different thing.
Yep.
And I just found that, I want to say it again, how to hold space for themselves and learn to navigate their felt senses and emotions by learning the language their body speaks. And I found that sentence was just this like, hey, if anyone's just like, I'm ready to do some work, but I don't know where to begin, pick one of those, like start there, right? Like,
Facts.
first of all, how to hold space for yourself could be a whole podcast, right? And learning the language that your body speaks, whole other podcast. But I just
Truth.
wanted to say that out loud during the episode because it is beautiful, and learning the language specifically that your body speaks,
Yep.
this individual, not we can listen to other people's stories, but they are also not our story. We can relate, we can resonate. Maybe someone you do say that is my story, but we all have a completely different journey. And again, it brings me back to that. If you're really wanting to go on a journey of self-love, and like you said, you already feel like you have the self-respect. For me, we need to find respect and trust of self first to really bring it into the love component. But if you really want to, dig into that, we have to embrace our like amazing, gorgeous uniqueness of our system. And that, my body talks to me in crazy ways where the people who know me well are like, what? Oh, that's just Jess, whatever. But if I was to tell someone else, they'd be like, oh my God, what? Are you dying? I'm like, no, that's just, this is, to me, it's how spirit speaks to me
Yep.
through my body. I have friends who hear voices. I have friends who have cognizance knowing or clairvoyance or whatever. My body speaks to me. It's my strongest tool. I have some other tools, but that one I can always rely on. Obviously, as a child, it can be scary when you're feeling certain things and you're like, am I dying? But I digress. So I just loved that because that really spoke to the mental health crisis right now. And I know we're both really passionate about that and understanding that it is just so incredibly important for people. I believe you said this also in your email to me. People who feel like they've healed enough to help others need to be helping others.
Yep.
They need to be supporting people, in their own way. But through their own work, we can find what way that is in an
100%.
appropriate and healthy and safe way.
Yes.
So yay, we could talk for hours. I love this.
I know
I
that, but what you said, like it's the boots on the ground now. As long as you've got self-awareness, I promise you your problems will still show up for you.
Yeah,
So if
yeah,
you've got self-honesty, that radical, like you said, radical self-love, I'm big on radical self-honesty,
yeah,
and you're
yeah,
aware, the problems will continue to come to the surface when they need to be looked at. Just trust that. Trust that
yeah,
you've developed the system for that.
yeah.
And there's people that need help now. And so it's like if you've got 2 feet that can move or a phone you can pick up, you've healed enough
Mhm.
to answer the call.
Yeah. And again, we will never arrive. So it's like, I've said to multiple people, like, I was waiting for some sort of arrival to start this podcast. Why? Why? And now we're having this beautiful conversation. So Kole, I want to just quickly plug your new book. This is the workbook that you were showing us really briefly, and it's an
Yep.
integration workbook, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So what it is, it's called the Condor Approach, and this is a 7-day mind body workbook. So it's actually a journal, a body tracking system. I talk about chakra development, what at certain ages, what can develop. And that is, if every person did that for 30 days, regardless of whether they're working with psychedelics, this is about self awareness,
Mm,
or if you're microdosing or whatever, do that for 30 days. Do all of it or as much as you can, and then tell me whether it works for you or not, because less than that
mm,
is irrelevant. You have to see some of the trends and patterns play out. It's data collection for consciousness, your consciousness, and how it's playing out in your body. And as you sit and body map it, you start to go, wow, on Sunday nights before I have to go back to work, I get a migraine. Why? How come I get migraines every Sunday night? Well, what's causing your headache and stressing you out and your thoughts are spinning up in your head? What's the physical function of that body part and the chakra development energy of it? And you start to see how emotions are stored. You're like, wow, isn't that interesting? If I
mm,
at least verbalize it and get it out of my body, some of those things don't tend to happen anymore. And
mm.
so that process, that the Condor Approach as a book is really our gift to the world. People can get it absolutely for free if you go to freeguide.vip, the digital version. If you want the physical version, it's $12 on Amazon for 7 days. If you're going on a retreat, take it with you, do it the week after, at least, at very minimum.
Mm,
Inside of it, there's a QR code to a free integration course. Everything I teach our coaches is in that free course. Because again, if everyone could trust themselves, if everyone could learn to tolerate and accept themselves and then get to that level of self love, they're going to build intimacy and connection in their lives. If
mm,
someone doesn't feel safe, they can't feel connected. If they don't feel safe, they can't be fulfilled. And connection starts with the self. So for us, it's that book is for anyone at any time, anywhere in the world, as long as they can at least get a digital
mhm,
access. And then people that want to learn the depth of the practices and body navigation, emotion navigation, body mapping, that's what we teach in the Condor approach with a done with you year coaching container. So we teach the methods, practice the methods, and then actually build the business structure out
mm,
with people. So our calls are each call is getting down one step of your what you're putting out into the world of the birthing process.
Gosh, this workbook specifically is just such a um, gift of service. The fact that you can even get it for free. So thank you. I am very much
Mm.
looking forward to getting it. And man, I wish I had it in that second week in Costa Rica.
I wish I
Um,
had it 15 years ago. That's how it even got developed. It was like everything I wish I had that took me 13 years to do. Someone could do it too if they
yeah,
had these tools, at least if they had the things like I do.
yeah. Absolutely. And also guys, I'm always listeners, I will link all of Kole's info, her website, www.condorapproach.com. And do you want to drop any like Insta handles or anything else for us
It's
or?
pretty straightforward. The Condor Approach on Instagram. We have the Condor Approach and Condor Approach and condorcoach.com. So the best, really central location is Instagram because it links you to everything. If you just go to the Condor Approach, we have tons of free resources. We have tons of access to things. And like you said, I like to keep it playful too because I don't think that there's anything sacred about being serious all the time. I like
Mhm.
to keep the same intentionality with play as I do with pain and growth. So if you like people that are super serious about healing, I'm probably not your person.
I love it. No, we have to laugh at ourselves and be an inner child. I feel like the minute that dies in me, I die.
Yep.
Absolutely. And the Psychedelic Coach podcast as well. Everyone go ahead and check that out. That's got like, I think I was just looking something like 220 something episodes in. So you've
Somewhere, something like that.
got a lot of content to listen to for that. And yeah, is there anything else, Kole, that you just like to leave the listeners on or any words of love?
You know, it really comes down to whatever it is that is calling you in your heart that you're not stepping into. Sometimes it just wasn't time. It wasn't just procrastination or I don't follow through. It just wasn't time. So pay attention to the time. When you know it's time, stop making excuses. When you know it's time, get the tools, get the support. You're going to have to either pay money or pay time. That's how this works. And so if you have more time, beautiful. But the next step is right around the corner. You have to slow down to see it. And so for especially this next year, space is going to be the most important currency you can create so you don't get caught up in any chaos or fear or lost or purpose driving activity. I would say find 10 minutes a day to just be with yourself and your body and ask your body, what do you need me to know, do, be, or understand? Talking to either your future self or your ancestors or your past loved ones or whatever, of asking for ease and grace in the teachings. It doesn't have to be suffering. It can still be painful without being sufferable. And so really the getting that 10 minutes or getting the Condor approach where it prompts you to do so will be the best investment you ever make in
Mm,
your personal growth journey.
mm. Thank you so much, Kole. This was such a treat. And I appreciated this conversation very much. And I think it's going to help a lot of people.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And to all of you beautiful souls, I honor all of you for everything that you are and everything that you're going to do. And I hope you have a very balanced rest of your day.